What's up, guys? This is TheKephas. Today I'm going to show you some macros that I've created with Gnome Sequencer Enhanced, an extremely powerful add-on that allows you to create robust macros that can perform most, if not all, of your rotation with a single button. This can be extremely useful if you have a disability like myself, or if you just want to be lazy. Bear in mind that these macros can be extremely helpful, but they also have their limits, so they're made primarily for those who are playing the game at a more casual level. But feel free to use them as you see fit. If you'd like to learn more about Gnome Sequencer and how to use it, I recommend that you head over to WoW Lazy Macros. You can find links to all of that, and to import strings for these macros in the description. Today we're going to be checking out the macro that I've created for Demonology Warlocks. Now, I really enjoy the playstyle of Demonology Warlocks. I like the rotation a lot. It's probably my favorite Warlock spec, but it's also the most difficult to macro, and trying to execute the rotation through the macro is a little bit more challenging than it seems, and we'll go over that as we look at the macro. But before we do, let's go ahead and open up the talent tree. Now, the philosophy behind my builds in the talent trees is simplicity first. Simplicity over optimization. I always want to stress this because I'm going for builds that work better in the macros. We're not going for min-maxing here. I tried my best to explain this, but there are some people that just will never understand that mindset. It's just never going to happen. Those people shouldn't be looking to use macros. For the rest of us that are, understanding where I'm coming from here, just remember that this build is not for optimization or min-maxing. It's for simplicity to make the macro function better, okay? So with that being said, on the left side, we have our Warlock side. There really isn't anything to go over on this side. It's mostly going to be utility. There are a few exceptions in here, but it's mostly pick and choose whatever you want. I mean, I guess one of the ones that's more simple is this one, Inquisitor's Gaze. This is a passive summon as opposed to this ability, which would be a lot more difficult to use, certainly in the macro. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, taking abilities like this, it's an extra ability. It does use a soul shard, but this is more utility, so it's not going to affect the macro. And that's the thing. Most of this side is utility, so I don't want to spend too much side on that. But on the right side, there are some things to talk about. Demonology points. Okay, so on the demonology side, a lot of it is pretty straightforward. I'm trying my best to make the rotation as simple as possible without adding in too many extra abilities, but there are some additions. So the first one is Soul Strike. This is a great talent to include, especially in the macro. It makes the rotation a little bit easier, giving you an extra generation of soul shards, short cooldown. Works out really well in the macro. It's instant cast ability. Vile Fiend would be the alternative, and I didn't go with this one because it would make the macro a little bit harder. Longer cooldown. It's nice to summon an extra demon, of course, but spending a soul shard on that would just complicate things a little bit, so I chose not to go with Vile Fiend. And then we get to Bombers. I love Bombers. I've loved the ability ever since it was added, but I never use it because it doesn't work in the macro. That's because it's a target location ability. We're playing a ranged class. Target location abilities do not work with ranged classes in Gnome Sequencer macros. So if you went with this one, you would absolutely need to manage it on a separate button. Demonic Strength, though, works really well in the macro. It's just a simple instant cast cooldown ability, so we just throw that in there, and it works out really well. Next up, I kind of have to go through because there's like a lot in throughout here. A Power Siphon, again, standard, straightforward cooldown. Throw that in the macro. It's going to work just fine. No big deal there. I didn't go with Grimoire, so that's just an extra longer cooldown that I just chose not to go with. And then we kind of get on down to really the bottom. Everything else is passive standard, spell, increasing, improving abilities type stuff. You know what I'm saying, I think. Okay, so Summon Demonic Tyrant, we've added in this one. It's such a good talent. It's just hard not to. It's such a fun talent, and we'll go over this a little bit. This will generate some soul shards. We'll talk about this in the actual macro and its application and some options that you have. But this is just such a great talent. It works really well with the rotation, and you can really just get a lot of benefit out of this ability. Okay, so that's where we kind of get to the bottom. So let me talk about one more thing. We'll talk about Demonic Tyrant here in a second. So down here at the bottom, Guillotine is a great talent. It's probably better than the one I chose. I chose the passive. Guillotine's amazing, but again, this is a target location ability, and it won't work in the macro for warlocks because they're ranged. Okay, so Guillotine, if you chose this one, you would definitely have to manage it on a separate button. But this one here works just fine in the macro, so that's why I chose that one. But yeah, it was rough not to go with the Guillotine. Such a cool ability, and yeah, just didn't go with it. So keep that in mind. Now, the bottom here, again, I've gone with, I guess, a suboptimal talent. I chose this one. This reduces the cooldown of Demonic Tyrant. The reason why I chose this one is because of me including this ability in the macro. So Demonic Tyrant being in the macro, it's nicer to have this talent, but this one here, Reign of Tyranny, is amazing. This is a great talent. And if you want the best talent, you'd probably want to go with this one. But with the way I have this ability included in the macro, then, you know, it's just, I felt like it was better to go with this one because you're going to get Demonic Tyrant more often. Okay, so you can switch this by all means, feel free to, and we'll go over Demonic Tyrant in the macro as we get there. But yeah, that's really the only other thing I really wanted to talk about. So hopefully that explains the build. I mean, again, it's pretty straightforward stuff. I don't know what I accidentally clicked out of. I guess there we go. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. Like I said, going for simplicity, going for what works best in a gnome sequencer macro. Keep that in mind. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the macro itself by typing /GSE to open up gnome sequencer. You gotta scroll down a bit to find the macro. It's called Keph Demo or Demo, whatever you want to say. Right click that. This is an all-in-one macro for Demonology Warlocks. If you would like to use my build, you can copy and paste this line here and import it into your talent tree, and you'll be good to go. With that being said, let's take a look at the macro itself. Okay, so this is a standard sequence macro, but before we get to sequence, you'll notice first we have Shadow Bolt. This is your main filler ability, and so I've kept this outside of the sequence so that the macro's going to try to use it less often than it otherwise would. Because if I put this ability in the actual sequence itself, you're going to be using Shadow Bolt too much. You're going to be using it all the time, and it's going to be very hard for you to use your other abilities. So as you're spamming away at this macro, it's going to try to use Shadow Bolt a little bit less often than pretty much everything else. And that's because once you get into the sequence, it's going to go through the sequence twice before it tries to use Shadow Bolt again. And so if you still feel like you're using Shadow Bolt more often, you could increase this here, repeat from 2 to 3 to 4, or whatever you want, depending on how fast you're spamming the macro. So for me, it's 2, so that means that it will try to use everything in the sequence twice as often as it will try to use Shadow Bolt, right? So it's pretty straightforward. That way you're not using Shadow Bolt too much, but it's still in there. And then we get down in here, we have Call Dreadstalkers. The macro is going to use that on cooldown, provided you have the soul shards for it. Then we have Soul Strike, using that one on cooldown. Power Siphon and Demonic Strength, using both of those on cooldown. And then, of course, lastly, we have Demonic Tyrant. Now, here's where the option comes in. I have included Demonic Tyrant in this macro for simplicity's sake. In fact, I'm going to add in here to make it a little bit better. We're going to add combat. Not combat. There we go. Combat. We're going to add that in, so that way you only use Demonic Tyrant when you are in combat. Okay. So this is objectively not ideal, because the idea behind Demonic Tyrant is you want to build up the largest army of demons you can before using it. That way you'll get the most out of it. And that's where Reign of Tyranny would be even more beneficial as well if you use it that way. The way I've got it included in here is simplicity. It's just going to use it whenever it's on cooldown. Okay, that's not ideal. Straight up, that is probably not ideal, but you know, we're not necessarily going for ideal, are we? We're going for simple. So that's why I included it. So if you don't want to use Demonic Tyrant in the macro, just remove it from the macro. Just right over here, you can see this X. Click this X. It'll remove it from the macro. Click save. And then you can manage Demonic Tyrant on a separate button. So that way, once you've built up the army of demons that you want, you can then use Demonic Tyrant and you'll be good to go. So it's just a simplicity thing is all. So feel free to do whatever you want, but I just included it for just, like I said, just for simplicity's sake. I mean, if you're out in the world just doing stuff, using your abilities, it really doesn't matter. I mean, you're not really like doing stuff out in the world. Like you're not really going to be in a situation very often where you need to build up a bunch of demons and then use Demonic Tyrant that way. If you're doing dungeons and stuff like that, it's different, but you know, hey, we're using macros and we know what we've already said about min-maxing. Okay, so just something to think about, but it's there if you want simplicity. Now let's go down here to key press. There is no key release for this macro, and that's because this class does not have any off global cooldown abilities that you'd want to use. But for key press, we have a lot of functionality here. Okay, so targeting enemy stuff. If you do not have a demon summon, no pet, then the macro will summon Felguard. If you happen to have a different demon summon, the macro will not summon Felguard, so you'll either want to dismiss that demon or summon Felguard manually, okay? But otherwise, the macro will summon your Felguard. So the good news is, say you're out in combat and your Felguard dies, the macro will prioritize summoning your Felguard before it does anything else. So just keep that in mind. That will help you out a lot. It's saved me several times. So yeah, just remember that. Obviously, if you want to heal your Felguard, you're going to manage that on separate buttons, but that's all utility stuff, obviously. So then we have our modifiers, and this is where I guess more of the complexity comes from. Okay, so abilities like Hand of Gul'dan and Demon Bolt are not going to work in the macro, so we've added modifiers. Shift for Hand of Gul'dan. This ability uses your soul shards. Okay, and so this way you're making sure that you're always getting the maximum value out of Hand of Gul'dan. You're making sure that you have enough soul shards. You want to have it, I think it's like at least 3 or 4 to use it, so that way you're getting the most out of it. And then of course, whenever you have Demonic Core, then you'd want to use Demon Bolt. You don't want to use Demon Bolt unless you have the cores, so you have to use a modifier for that one as well, and that's where you hold down control and you can use Demon Bolt. So when you get those procs, you can use Demon Bolt, and when you have enough soul shards, you can use Hand of Gul'dan with your modifiers. And that's pretty much how those are going to work. So with modifiers, you can pretty much fit the entire rotation into one button. Now I could add an extra modifier, and you could as well. You could add in mod alt and then put summon Demonic Tyrant in that way if you want to, and then you could actually have that included through a modifier. That's another option as well. Like I said, I just kind of threw it in there for simplicity's sake, but that is another option you could do. But yeah, pretty much straightforward. Last up, we have pet attack. This will make sure that your demon is attacking your target, so make sure that you are targeting correctly before you use this macro, because you're going to send your demon to attack whatever you have targeted when you hit the macro. So no fat fingering, okay? Be careful. So pretty much, it's a pretty straightforward macro. It's going to use your filler ability a little bit less often than everything else. It's going to try to get through everything, keep your Dreadstalker's own cooldown and all your other, cooldown talents, using those as much as possible. Make sure you use your modifiers for Hand of Gul'dan, spinning your soul shards, and then also your cores on Demon Bolt with your other modifier. Keep all that in mind. And then just remember Demonic Tyrant, that's an option. You can take that out. You can manage it however you want to, but it is there. So let me know what you think about this macro in the comments below. Like I said, it's a little bit hard and clunky feeling in the execution, and that's just with the procs and with everything. It's a little tricky to use because of how the class plays. But it's going to do some stuff to help you out, hopefully. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and I will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is TheKephas. Until next time.